Hello, and welcome back to Ontology Explained. I'm Casey Hart, philosopher and ontologist, and today we're going to continue our series on fallacies. In the last episode, we talked about the principle of charity and the strawman fallacy with themes of kindness and trying your best. And we're going to continue on that theme of kindness today as we talk about the ad hominem fallacy. I want to kick us off with a quote from Margaret Thatcher. She said, "I always cheer up immensely if an attack is particularly wounding because I think, well, if they attack one personally, it means they have not a single political argument left." And I think we get and follow along with the sentiment that Thatcher is putting out there. If someone's attacking me, then they're not attacking my position. And the reason for that is probably they don't have good attacks on my position anymore. I've sort of shored up and defended it. Now, that's not always the case. Some people are just mean and will insult you even if they have reasons to think your views are wrong. But let's set that to the side for right now and just focus on the fallacy that Thatcher is bringing up. And that fallacy is the ad hominem fallacy, which is an attack of the person. By the end of this video, I want to cover a bunch of different examples. We'll start with defining what ad hominem fallacies are. We'll look at examples of the different types of ad hominem fallacies. And then I want to show some examples where it looks like it might be an ad hominem fallacy, but it's actually a good piece of reasoning. Ad hominem fallacies are attacks of a person rather than attacks on the position or argument that that person is making. And the spirit of this goes back to thinking of logic and reasoning and truth as objective and egalitarian procedures and processes. When I make an argument, if it's a good argument, you could take that very same argument and go make it yourself to someone else, and that argument shouldn't have gotten any worse if you're just copying it, right? It doesn't matter who's saying the thing. If the things are true and the ideas hold together well, it should hold together for all of us. And the ad hominem fallacy, arguments that run afoul of that, undermine that principle. It's saying, you made this argument and you're bad, so your view, right, must be false. But the argument isn't just made by me. The argument could be made by anyone. So we don't want to attack the person. We want to attack the position. There are at least 3 different subspecies of ad hominem attacks that get laid out there. I'm going to talk about 2 of them today, although I'll list all 3. The first is the abusive ad hominem, attacks directly at a person. Then there are circumstantial ad hominems, where we're trying to say a person's not in good circumstances to make the argument well. And then there are the tu quoque ad hominems. Tu quoque is about accusing someone of hypocrisy, and that is such a special type of fallacy that it ends a fun one to say, tu quoque, that I'm going to save a whole nother video for that one. So we're just going to hit the first 2. Okay, let's see some examples of those, and we'll start with the abusive ad hominem. Every abusive ad hominem has a structure like this. It says something like, Steve says X, and Steve is a moron or ugly or uncoordinated, something bad. So X is false. Right? We say Steve made a claim, and then we say something terrible about Steve, so Steve's claim is false. That's the reasoning. And clearly this is a bad piece of reasoning, right? We haven't made any connection whatsoever from Steve's bad-making feature, right? If he's an idiot, why does that mean that the thing that he says is false? Instead, just tell me why that thing is false. Stop attacking Steve. And again, back to the egalitarian point, fine, if Steve is a moron and he made this argument, then let Kara make this argument, and now it's good, right? That's not the way that things should work. Let's go take a look at a real-world example from back in February. We go to Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, among others. And there was discussion where Zelensky was saying that he couldn't trust Russia to reliably make a ceasefire or other agreements with them because Russia had broken those agreements in the past, and therefore the word was untrustworthy. And in response to this, in the back and forth, Vance went to a different topic, and that was the topic of Zelensky's gratitude. He said, quote, "I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict. Have you said thank you once this entire meeting?" And notice what happened here. Vance and Trump and Zelensky were engaged in a particular debate, And then Vance switched to talking about Zelensky being ungrateful. And we don't have to litigate here whether Zelensky was sufficiently grateful or not. You can just observe the structure of the argument. Vance goes from, you said this thing, to you have this undesirable feature in Vance's view, and therefore we shouldn't take the thing seriously. The thing is false that Zelensky has been advancing. And this theme was actually continued later on in the press conference when Brian Glenn asked a question of Zelensky. He brought up something about Zelensky's fashion, saying, "Why don't you wear a suit? Why don't you wear a suit? You're the highest level in this country's office, and you refuse to wear a suit. Do you own a suit?" Again, whether Zelensky is wearing a suit or not, whether someone is shabbily dressed or well-dressed, shouldn't have any bearing on the argument or structure of argument that they're making, and therefore this is an abusive ad hominem. Now let's look at circumstantial ad hominems. And these ones have the following form, something like Sarah says X, and Sarah really stands to benefit if X were true, so X is false. Again, notice we go from someone making a claim to, instead of saying something bad about Sarah in this case, we say, Sarah would love it if X were true, so X must be false. Again, hopefully you can see this is not a good pattern of reasoning. Even if they really want X to be true, that certainly doesn't tell me that X is false. At best, maybe what that's going to tell me, and we'll look more at this later, is that I should take Sarah's advice with a grain of salt here because maybe she's engaging in some bad reasoning. And practical examples for this abounds. We can look at one for a court case, maybe something like this. Premise 1, the defendant's expert witness says the defendant was not of sound mind. Premise 2, but they are being paid by the defendant. So their testimony is false. The defendant knew what they were doing. So we have those two types of arguments, right? The abusive ad hominem and the circumstantial ad hominem, where we go from somebody's claim to some compromising feature about that person or negative feature, and then we reject the claim that they made. And in both cases, we see that that's just too strong. And that makes a temptation that whenever someone is insulting or testing someone's credibility, they say, oh, that's just an ad hominem. You shouldn't take that seriously. And that would be a mistake too. There are actually lots of cases where we should question a person's credibility. In fact, we probably don't do that enough. And we are even sometimes justified in attacking a person. So let's look at some examples from that. First off, the whole point of the fallacy, right, the ad hominem fallacy, is that we should be focusing on the argument and not the person. But there are cases when the argument is about the person. So imagine an argument where you were talking to someone about who they were thinking about marrying. And they say, Steve says I should marry him, but Steve is abusive and mean, so I should not marry him. Would you be able to respond and say, that's fallacious. That's an ad hominem attack against Steve? Of course not, right? Yes, we're insulting Steve. It's insulting to say that he is abusive and mean, but his character, his person, is the very thing at issue here. Is this a good enough person? Is this a good match for someone to marry? So attacking that person and pointing out their character flaws is exactly the kind of thing that you should be doing or considering if there are those weaknesses. In the case of circumstantial ad hominems, there are actually lots of places where we should be pushing on the credibility of someone so that we can better or be skeptical in the right kinds of places. So imagine a couple of kids working on their math homework, and one says to the other, Premise 1, you said the answer to question 5 is 17 pi. Premise 2, but you failed the last 3 math tests. Conclusion, I'm skeptical about your conclusion. And that feels like a pretty good piece of reasoning. If you are doing math with someone who always gets the wrong answers, it's not an ad hominem attack in a fallacious way to point out that they always get the wrong answers to these things, and therefore you're skeptical that they got the right answer in this particular case. Right? And this happens all the time. I recently went car shopping, and I was at the Honda dealer, and we had this kind of conversation. So premise 1, you say this Honda has great resale value. Premise 2, but you'll get a commission if I buy from you, so I still don't have strong reason to believe you. And that's actually a good piece of reasoning, right? If a salesperson tells you something and you know they would profit greatly if that thing were true, then that does undermine your confidence that you would get from them in telling you that thing. Now, it turns out those Hondas still had great resale value, and I could go verify that in another way. But I think it's healthy to say, I can't take this other person's word for it because maybe they're lying to try and get me to believe that thing. And we should also be able to turn this inward. So the other day we were thinking about getting a couch, and I was looking at 3 different color choices, and one of those color choices we could have, in only a couple of days, and the other ones we'd have to special order and it'd be like a month away. And I had to decide which of these 3 colors do I think is the best look in our living room. And I thought it was the one that we would get in a couple of days. But I could run this argument against myself, right? And say, well, I think this, but it would be really good for me if this thing was true. So maybe I should be a little less confident in that thing being true. And then I brought in some other third parties, right? Like someone who's more objective, who doesn't care when the couch arrives and can just tell me which one they think is best, right? This is a healthy way to reason. So circumstantial ad hominems swing too hard the other way by undermining someone's credibility, and they just declare that whoever's compromised, whatever they're saying must be false. But it's actually really good reasoning to say someone has a lot to gain if this thing were true, so I should make sure that they dotted their I's and crossed their T's, and that those reasons actually hold rather than just taking their word for it. Again, the bottom line is that we should be giving good and relevant reasons for the positions that we're considering, and ad hominem attacks attack the person rather than those positions. We reviewed the 3 types, and we looked at 2 in particular, the abusive ad hominem and the circumstantial ad hominem. We'll save the tu quo que for a follow-up video in the future. But just because they're ad hominem fallacies doesn't mean that you should never consider your interlocutor's character or good or bad things about them, because sometimes those are directly relevant to the arguments. And you should also think about their circumstances, because that might cause you to undermine their credibility. And that's good reasoning, not fallacious. I hope you enjoyed this video. Go out there, make great arguments, be kind to each other, don't personally attack other people, and I'll see you for the next video sometime soon.